Ve karşınızda Profesör Doktor Nicos Passas. Alkışlarınızla sahneye davet ediyorum. Northeastern Üniversitesi Kriminoloji ve Cezai Adalet Profesörü.
Good morning. It is a privilege and an honor to be back in Istanbul with you. And thank you very much for the pleasure of being here. I would like to pick it up from where Raphael Monti left it and tell you that from my experience from having visited about 70 countries in the last 10 years fighting corruption, I notice that A, we're not doing enough to fight the problem, and B, we still haven't gotten regulation and law right. We haven't gotten, we collectively, we haven't gotten it right what we prohibit and what we allow and what we do not prohibit. So there is a problem, there is a gap between doing the legal thing and doing the right thing. The compliance officer can tell you how to stay out of trouble with the law. But she or he will not tell you how to sleep well at night or not have stomach problems with what you have to do at work. And we have to improve the sleep quality of executives as well. This disjunction between legality and legitimacy is a global problem. You may find examples from your own experiences, and it has two main sides. One is when we prohibit things that are culturally, developmentally, financially useful, and yet they are criminal offenses. And on the other hand, we have things that are lawful but awful. And I will spend most of my time on the second category. Now, let me start with my favorite picture. What is wrong with this picture? That's not the way to treat a car, right? You can't have so many people on it, and you have to take care of it a little bit better. Otherwise, it breaks down. So a good law says you're not supposed to do this. But here is the context. The car is coming from a village where there is no job, there is no public transportation, there is no other means of going from home to work, earning a living, and bringing food to the table. If you stop this car, arrest the people, communities suffer, livelihoods are destroyed. In the same way, this kind of cruel enforcement tells us that fighting corruption on an empty stomach cannot work. You can't fight corruption on an empty stomach. That's the importance of context. In abstract, laws can be fine. In practice, they can be disastrous. And it is not only this example. We have many others. We can all agree that this is not a way to carry babies in buckets. This is not a way to take kids to school. This is not the way to go to a religious festival. But that's the only way people do it. You may have seen this. Do you know what this picture is? It is from a school. At the end of the year, this is the time of the exam, and the people up on the walls and the windows are friends and relatives giving the answers to their children. Because they have to have at least one member of the family that gets the diploma, gets a job, and feeds the rest of the family. Right? So, and I can give you an example from my own country, right across in Greece. I would not think twice before putting some money where we're supposed to have a free national health system. But if you do not pay a bribe, you know, no one is going to pay attention. If I have a sick child, do you think I will think twice before I put some money in an envelope and pass it on so that the fever stops and my child gets well? So it's not that people are unethical or corrupt. It's because there is conflict of values created by a problematic context. There is a higher value that they're trying to protect. So you can find all kinds of situations like this all over the world. Not very long ago in the United States, you had this kind of systematic discrimination, right? So we have plenty of such examples close to home and far away. Going to the other side now, where I want to focus. Things that the law allows and governments even subsidize, encourage. And yet, when you look at their effects, they are worse than organized crime. We associate that with the communities, with the mafia kind of communities. Let me give you, part of the problem, of course, is that through globalization, we have very different legal standards. And that is a nightmare for legal departments of global companies, right? That is one of the problems, legal asymmetries. The other thing is that there may be contradictions. There may be bad laws because you have lobbyists, because you have authoritarian regimes, because you have corporate influence that affect what is allowed and what isn't in a given country. That cannot be a scientific standard to make comparisons and promote good behavior and conduct. So we need our own, and this is the one that I propose. Crime is misconduct that involves unnecessary and avoidable harm. So there is harm serious enough to warrant the intervention of the state. This is what criminal law does. Otherwise, we have civil and administrative laws for that. And it is similar to acts criminalized by the jurisdictions concerned. Let me just give you one example. Going from the past in the United States, where there was no federal environmental standard about toxic waste and its disposal. It was delegated to the states. Individual states, like New Jersey, had great laws because they had a lot of chemical industry and they wanted to protect their citizens. So they had a long list of toxic substances that you had to pay 10 times more to get properly disposed of. Pennsylvania, across the river, didn't. So what happened? There were all kinds of people with Italian-American accent who got into trucks, picked up the toxic waste from New Jersey, crossed over the border, and dumped everything in the rivers and the lakes and the farmland. And they broke no law. Because it was not illegal. It was not toxic. It was not defined as toxic in Pennsylvania. This is what I call crimes without law violations. It meets the standard that I gave you, which has a lot of legal substance behind it. It is serious harm. The state must intervene, and it is criminalized in one of the jurisdictions concerned. And this problem that can happen within a small area of the United States is what we have now globalized, because with the way in which systems, people, companies, substances, everything interacts, we have this opportunity to compartmentalize what you do in such a way that you break the law nowhere, but the final result is an absolute disaster. So part of the problem here is also that we, in economic terms, don't tell the truth. We may think that what is good for General Electric, we used to say what is good for GE is good for America. There's trickle-down effects and everybody benefits. Well, is it always so? And does that apply to the rest of the world? Is it what good is for Goldman Sachs good for the rest of the world? Or Enron? There are big questions there. I will give you some more examples. But the problem is this. How do prices get made? You look at the cost of producing something or a service. You add a margin of profit, and you have the price. The problem with a series of practices in the corporate world is this. A lot of the costs are hidden from the price, but passed on to the general society. The cost of properly disposing toxic waste doesn't disappear. It is borne by the Pennsylvanians. But it doesn't get reflected in the plastics that the companies making this and taking advantage of this opportunity are charging to the consumers. So the cost gets externalized, displaced on the least privileged, on the least powerful members of society, the global community. So prices don't tell the truth. And when these companies and businesses flourish, societies actually suffer. It is not trickle down, it is a disaster that trickles down. So as we have this globalization process with the legal asymmetries, the risk of these things happening rise dramatically. And I can give you some additional examples. It was mentioned earlier, the problem of the global financial crisis. In fact, a lot of the undue risk-taking that was characterizing subprime and derivative transactions was illegal. Very few prosecutions. But the bulk of it was not. It was legal. How much of it have we regulated? How much of it did we actually discourage? People kept their premium, the bonuses. People kept their positions. People kept rising up. The perverse incentives are still in place. What created the global crisis is still there. Another example is when farmers rose up in Mexico demanding some basic human rights. This memo was written in the Wall Street. Financial markets might not respond positively to increased democracy because it leads to increased uncertainty. So for some, democracy is bad because it gives me and my bond holdings uncertainty and risk. So here you have a democratic deficit kind of problem, an externalization of a different type of cost. We can have one example after another. You want an environmental disaster that is in Louisiana with big hog farming goes on. 5,000 square miles in Louisiana are completely depleted of oxygen. Nothing grows, nothing lives, because of the manure and artificial fertilizers that go into that area. 5,000 square miles in an advanced OECD society. So look at the conditions that have been imposed in Greece is the latest example, but you can see all examples of odious debt and austerity measures that have been imposed on countries, mostly in developing countries, by international institutions in order to give them lending support, technical assistance, and so on going forward, producing additional disasters. From the pharmaceutical industry, you may not have heard the example, the case of the Tuskegee Experiment. Tuskegee is in Alabama. It was a federally funded, US federally funded project, the national health. The taxpayers paid for this experiment that was about what is the effect of sexually transmitted diseases, syphilis in this case, if it is left untreated. Untreated when penicillin, the cure, was already there. So the doctors would go to the village, would go to the small place, pretend that they're offering treatment, give them status because they were picked up in limousines to go, so they would increase their status, thinking that they are being treated for what problem they had. And it was a study to see how the body reacts when you do nothing about it. They were receiving placebo. Take another example, again from the US. I've been working there since 1989, so I have a lot of research and examples from there. This is the example of Dalkon Shield, as a way of avoiding getting pregnant. It had a manufacturing problem. It was an intrauterine device that was producing pelvic inflammatory disease, leading to serious disease, infertility, and in some instances, the death of the women who were using it. When problems surfaced, they blamed the morality of women. Then they blamed the skills of the doctors. Then there was a whistleblower who was fired, and they banned the Dalkon Shield intrauterine device in the United States. But they did not stop the manufacture. They continued exporting it to more than 80 countries. Again, this was lawful. There was no law in Africa, in Australia, in Europe saying you cannot use this, you cannot import this. The knowledge about the problems was also not shared. So you had tons and tons of women suffering from this, families destroyed, when they knew full well that this was a bad product. So we can go on and on and on. And we can talk about what brings to that. It is a problem of not recognizing issues. It is a problem of using too much corporate power. It is the ideology of the free market that every time we let, as Monty also mentioned, if things get unregulated, hell breaks loose. Okay, we got problems invariably, right? But the biggest problem from my perspective is that we actually don't see the problem. We don't see these things as problems. We take them for granted. This is the way business is done, right? And this is why we have a rise of anti-corruption legal instruments, culminating to the UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, and the Arab Anti-Corruption Convention more recently. Very comprehensive instruments, also the Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. So complicated we had to write legislative guides. And I was, in fact, the drafter for both of these things, thinking that this is the way that we move the needle. This is how we move forward. We need the law, we need the political will at the top in order to get things done. Well, it's not enough. It's important, but it is not enough. We have 181 countries, parties to the UN Convention. We have additional texts from the OECD to the World Economic Forum, NGOs, and others. In addition, tons of money, because the anti-corruption agenda is common with rule of law, development, and governance. So we're talking about billions of dollars going in the last 15, 20 years into the anti-corruption industry. And it is not working. You look at any metric you want to use. You want to use Transparency International, despite methodological problems. Scores drop in the very countries where most of the money is invested, sub-Saharan Africa. You look at global integrity, implementation grades are pretty bad. You see that top people get away with it with impunity. You see that we throw law and bureaucracy at the problem, making it more complex and difficult to manage, adding incentives to corruption instead of removing them. We see that compliance is about how not to get in trouble with the law as opposed to sleeping well at night and doing the right thing. And the result is, you think also that maybe as more countries ratify the convention, there's progress. No, the trend is flat to down. Then you think that if we introduce more anti-corruption independent authorities, we will succeed. No, flat to down. You look at governance in general. This is the global community. It's not a particular country. All governance metrics, including top right, the control of corruption, the world is going down or flat. It looks like it's dead. This is the no signal kind of thing. Then you look at Ernst & Young survey. of 2,500 officials around the world. This is a global survey. And what is troubling is 46% of chief finance officers think that it is okay to engage in a number of unethical practices. That's the reality. This is an alternative way of looking at the world. Look at, and you would expect, they asked these 2,500 people how much of a problem with fraud and corruption you have in your company, in your country. Here's the answers. And you do expect to find Nigeria there. And you do expect to find Egypt there, pretty high. But look at the top. Germany, Norway, almost just as bad. 26%, more than a quarter of the people think that fraud and corruption is a big problem in their country, in their environment. And then look, Saudi Arabia, 2. Russia, 16. Argentina, 2. I don't know what Brazil is. But this is upside down. If you take the perception index upside down, which tells you that it matters what question you ask and to whom you address it, because you get a very different piece of information to work with. And the most recent Ernst & Young, even more troubling last year, survey is that 42% of the corporate officials think it's okay to engage in unethical behavior if it helps meeting financial goals. So we design ethics programs and we design compliance things, but it is the equivalent of exercising by running around the block. You don't do anything to your body if you run around this block so many times. And we only focus on bribery as opposed to conflict of interest, political finance, and other things that are actually representative of problems in other countries. So we get around the rules. We have a collective blindness, willful blindness. We're not looking at the problem. We think we're doing great. In other instances, there are rules and nobody pays any attention, like this one. You're not supposed to climb, play, or play around the pipe, and everybody is. And then we design our transparent. We think everything is hanky-dory until the toilets hit the bridge, and then forget about your reputation or your good smell. And that is, remember, Siemens, Volkswagen, Samsung, they all spend tons of money for compliance programs. Did that do any good to them before they were caught up? I do not know how much Petrobras had spent, but maybe they had also a program there. And then anti-corruption, completely uncoordinated. It's like building bridges like this, that in the end, ends do not meet. Or we're building stairs, because that is the specification of where that go actually nowhere. Balconies that are for show, because you can't use them. A house with a garage, but on the first floor, so good luck using it. A toilet, so you have hygiene, but not even a dwarf can go there. Right? So that gives you demoralization, and I see this demoralization in my classes in different universities where people come from parts of the world where they see no future, where they see no hope, where they see no meritocracy. And they do not plan to go back because they prefer to actually work for what they do and what they earn. So we have to start seeing this as a problem, because unless we do so, we're never paying any attention or giving any energy to solving it. We have to think outside the box. And there is a long list of things, but one of the things that I want to show you is about how deviance and misconduct get routinized. If you can please click on the race for the first little video to show. It is about how things happen to
The Ash experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
Please begin. The experiment you will be taking part in today involves the perception of line length Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example, if you...
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1. 1. 1.
He's struggling.
2.
Resisting.
1.
Upset.
Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3.
3.
3.
Struggling.
3.
3.
He
The ASH
falls for
experiment has
it.
been repeated
But
many
he's still
times,
upset.
and the results have been supported again and again. We will conform to the group. Again, we're very social creatures. We're very much aware of what the people around us think. We want to be liked. We don't want to be seen to rock the boat, so we will go along with the group. Even if we don't believe what people are saying, we'll still go along.
1. 1. 1.
He just
Group
goes along like
dynamics
nothing
is one of the
happened.
most powerful forces in human
This is
psychology.
how the problems get normalized,
One.
routinized, and we get into doing things the wrong way because that's the way business is done. So this is one part of the problem, and this is how we act behaviorally. In the second test, I want you to, in the second video, it's a little exercise with you. Those of you who have done it, please do not participate. But it is about awareness. It's 2 teams. If you can click on that, it's 2 teams, 1 black, 1 white, throwing the ball. I want you to count the number of the passes the white team makes.
How many passes does the team in white make?
Concentrate.
Go!
Stop it. Can you stop it?
13.
Okay, well, you got the answer. How many of you thought there were 13 passes? Raise your hands. Those of you who thought there were 13 passes. How many of you saw the Moonwalking Bear? If you can play it, play the rest of it, please.
Moonwalking Bear.
So you can see that this is how the brain works. We only see what we're looking for, not what is right in our face. People are talking about seeing the white elephant in the room. Well, this is about the black walking bear in the room. It is right there, and no one pays attention. It's like the problem I've been telling you. We take it for granted, and no one is doing enough about it. And that's the mentality switch, the adjustment to our brain that we need to make to move forward. Now, there are collective actions happening, and I will conclude very quickly right now. There is, however, a problem with the effectiveness, and I can spend an entire week telling you why it hasn't worked so far. There is this movement of creating social value that says, pick a social problem, find an answer, and build it into your business model to make things work. And this has gained a lot of traction in many parts of the world, but it has limits. Part of the idea is that these externalities that we talked about actually come back to cost the society itself. Illiteracy, bad infrastructure, bad health, lack of skills, inequality. All of these are problems that create the business environment, create in the business environment lack of sustainability. So we all pay for that in the end. So the question is, how do we bring this back? We do have problems with all of these asymmetries and examples of we only learn with disaster. Something happens, and like the fire in this tower in London. This tower in London had actually on the front material that is actually banned in the United States, and it is made by a company in the United States that exported the material to the United Kingdom. Anything that is more than 40 feet high in structure is not supposed to use this material that was used for a 24-story building where dozens of people actually lost their lives last week, right? So in the end, there will be an inquiry. People will be held responsible, but that's too late for the families who lost their loved ones in there, right? So there are still limits. There are many situations where we need to actually create rules, create norms. Technology is far ahead of the law. In many instances, look at digitization, robotization, nanotechnology. There are all kinds of things happening before us. And if you are the compliance officer looking for a tool or the guidance, you're not going to find it. It's ethics, it's values, it's ethics-based compliance that is going to tell you what the right thing is, the gut feeling, the smell test, right? So we need this norm-making process in order to create impact. Impact. Do not measure just the metrics like running around the block. Does it work? Does it change behavior? Does it change attitudes? Does it make people happier, more loyal, productive? Is it reducing corruption, promoting integrity in society? That's the bottom line. And there are 5 basic elements for this. A common agenda, a way of measuring how we go around, division of labor among companies and other stakeholders, continuous communication, and an organization that coordinates this. That's the recipe for finding an answer to what is a complex social problem, and that is corruption. We either do this, we either coordinate and do this for the long term, or we continue fighting corruption like this. We're getting in the way of each other, and we think that we're doing something smart. Thank you so much.
Sir, Professor, please. Thank you. What a wonderful presentation. You gave us a lot to think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Dakikalık bir kahve arasından sonra paralel oturumlarımızla birlikte olacağız. Bu salonda 2 numaralı paralel oturum gerçekleşecek. 3. taraf risklerini anlattığımız. Diğerleri 1. katta gerçekleşecek. Görüşmek üzere.